All right, welcome back to the Live Ultralight podcast powered by Outdoor Vitals. Today, you guys have a very special treat. It is just me on the podcast mic here, and I'm going to be recapping a 100-mile backpacking trip I just took in the Wind River mountain range. This trip was really kicked off by our 100-mile challenge, so you'll probably hear me refer to that. But yeah, it was kind of like a plan BDC option for me. So there's a lot to cover here, but hopefully throughout this episode, I'll just be able to kind of walk you through, take you on the trail with me as I relive this particular adventure. I'll talk a little bit about some pieces that I was testing as far as gear goes. I'll talk to you about the Wind River mountain ranges themselves and what I saw and what I learned, because those mountains are phenomenal. I've actually been into them one other time about, I want to say it's 5 years ago, and I thought they were really, really cool, but I had no idea how much more there was to those mountains. So we'll be covering the trip, we'll be covering the mountains, we'll be covering gear, but really it's just going to be a very informal and fun episode because it's just me. I didn't bring anyone on to interview me about this process. I just wanted to share with you guys, and especially all of you that are the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of you guys that are doing the 100-mile challenge. Hopefully this is relatable and fun for you to relive as well. And there were some really interesting things, for me at least, to see how things panned out and how specifically year over year experience made this trip possible. And we'll dig more into that. So I guess let's start by talking about why the Wind Rivers, how did the trip get planned? How did things come about? And the plan, and some of you may be aware of this, was to go back and hike another section of the Colorado Trail. We had about 135 miles of trail that we were planning to go and hike to do the next section. We're trying to do the Colorado Trail in 4 sections over 4 years. However, in July, I was out riding my mountain bike with my kids and trying to be the cool dad that I want to be. I was showing them a cool jump on the mountain bike as we were riding around a little kids' skills park. And I don't know, the 4th or 5th time I hit this jump, my bike kicked out from underneath me, which is why I don't jump on a mountain bike, because it just behaves a lot more different than I'm used to growing up on dirt bikes. And it kicked out sideways, and I couldn't save it, and I came down hard on my shoulder, and I separated my shoulder. So now I've got this really wicked awesome lump in my shoulder, and it was a whole massive setback. So between that and some of the other guys, things going around in the office, we actually fully decided to cancel the Colorado Trail and put that on the back burner. And I kind of wrote off, in a lot of ways, the 100-mile challenge, just thinking I'll have to do the stacked version. But as time went on and I worked on rehab and healing the shoulder, it became more practical that, hey, maybe I could go do something. And something to note here, too, is after I finished my 100-mile hike in May, I took a massive break from running and hiking in general. We had a lot of things going on. We had some other canceled trips in June, so I wasn't getting out on hiking as much as I'd like to. And then I just quit trail running for 2 months. And then I got injured right when I started to trail run again, and I couldn't continue to trail run. So I was pretty much feeling like I hadn't trained since May. But my shoulder started to feel a lot better, and I just realized, hey, I have a 5-day window where I didn't have my kids. And so I thought if I was able to find something, maybe I could still do the 100-mile challenge nonstop, and keep kind of my streak alive of doing these 100-mile hikes with the OVO 100-mile challenge for the last, I don't know what it's been, 4 or 5 years. And so I started to look at the Sawtooth Mountains and had a route all planned. I was all excited about that. And then I found out about the Wapiti fire up there, and they ended up shutting down most of the wilderness I was going into. And so it came down to a third plan and option, which was the Wind Rivers. And so I got looking in there at like, where have I not been in the Wind Rivers? What do I want to cover? What's practical and possible for me? It needs to be a loop because I'm the only one going. So I don't have a shuttle. I don't have options like that. And I'd heard a lot about the Cirque of Towers. And so I thought, it'd be really cool to start more on that end and do the Cirque of Towers and then, figure out a big loop from there. So I just pulled open Onyx Backcountry, threw it into the 3D mode, and just started playing around with trail options. And, if you know anything about me, especially this time of year, I want to go into the high country. I love being up above tree line and seeing those big, massive basins and granite peaks and things like that. And so that was the goal, was to put together a trip where I could get above tree line and just see some amazing, amazing sights. So I spent a weekend, not a whole weekend, but just clicking around and playing around and looking for really cool routes through here. And actually got really serious about trying to summit Gannett Peak, which is the highest peak in Montana. But the more I read trip reports and looked at that, the more it seemed like it's not the time of year to do it solo, I guess, especially as someone who's not a major mountaineering kind of guy. You needed to rope up. You needed to have a partner. Glaciers are getting sketchy. Snow bridges were getting sketchy. So I ended up kind of throwing that out. And I went to a route starting at, I think it's called Big Sandy or Sandy Trailhead. Big Sandy Trailhead. And basically going north from there. So I was going to be able to see I was able to see all new country in the Wind Rivers. Because the only other place I'd been to was Titcomb Basin. So with that in mind, loaded up a pack with all the prototypes and things that I needed to be testing and a camera. I actually brought our big friggin' camera and a tripod to try to capture some of these views that I knew were going to be on this hike. Usually I'll hike with like GoPro or cell phone or Insta360 and just keep like it in more of that action cam size and weight. But I decided to go big on this one and pack a camera, which we'll loop back to. So I drove up there on a Wednesday, and got to the trailhead, and it's a really long dirt road to get in there, so that set me back, and there's just always setbacks, right? So by the time I got there, I had like less than an hour, or about an hour of hiking that I was able to do. And the thought there was, I had, so from the time that I dropped my kids off at school on a Wednesday morning, I had until Monday after I'd be after school and I'd be picking them up from school. And so I have this that was my window. And so Wednesday I get up there and wanted to get some extra miles in, because essentially that means that I have Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday to do the hike, because I've got to be driving back Monday morning pretty much straight away to get home in time to make sure I'm picking up my kids from school. And so my pretty much the thought was, if I can sneak in any extra miles on Wednesday, that makes it so I don't have to hike 25 miles a day on these other days. But unfortunately, I was only able to get in a few miles Wednesday night. But it was a lot of fun to get in there Wednesday night, because it had been raining and snowing the day as I was getting in there. And so I got to have some really beautiful views of the mountains, mountain peaks covered in snow right from where I ended up stopping for the night. It was super wet. And just something about the Wind River Range, it's a ton of it. There's a lot of granite there, but also it's one of the only mountain ranges in the area. And because of its size and stature and the way that it runs, it is just a magnet for storms. It collects a ridiculous amount of water, and I mean, a quick Google search will tell you that there's 1,300 named lakes in the range, which is just insane. There's just so much water there, right? So I knew it was going to be a really good test for, shelters, top quilts, and potentially rain gear as well. But got in there, slept the first night, got up the next morning, and started hiking. And I didn't get that far into the hike, 10 plus miles, I believe, when I remembered that I had left all of my lunches in the van. So I like, on a lot of these trails, I like to do like a tortilla, meat and cheese with mayonnaise lunch. I don't know what it is about mayonnaise, but in the mountains, like the fatty texture or something about mayonnaise always hits the spot for me. And then be able to get some meat or some cheese, I feel like also just helps me kind of stay regular with things. And so I look forward to those lunches all the time. And it's not the most calorie dense or the lightest weight things, but I just really have found that they bode well with me. But I had left all of them in my cooler. So I had no lunches for any of the days. And so I learned pretty much straight away that I was going to be rationing food for this 100-mile hike. So, and I guess just to give a little bit of context, when I left Big Sandy, I pretty much was going, let me just reorient, almost straight north, not quite straight north, so I'd go up towards a river called Bolter Reservoir, sorry, not a river, and then getting up into some high country on the Highline Trail. And I think it's important to note too that there's like a Highline and a Skyline Trail. No, there's a High Route and a Highline Trail. So you've got Andrew Skirka's High Route, which is different than the Highline Trail. So anyway, so I took off on that, got up in there, and day one was just a beautiful, beautiful day of hiking. Didn't see anyone all day long. And I was just, I got some really great, beautiful vistas. Things were going pretty well. Towards the evening time, I got into some more trees and closer to some other lakes. I did bump into one group of hikers that day. And essentially, I was trying to hike extra miles because I thought this was going to be one of my more flat hikes of the trip. So I actually ended up hiking, I want to say, 27 miles that day. And I camped next to a lake called August Lake, which is near North Fork Lake. Super, super pretty area. And if you want to see some of these views, we will release a YouTube video at some point, and you can see just kind of what this looks like. But to recap day one, just trying to think of what the day was like. It was just lake after lake after lake. But I was surprised at how far north this mountain range is. The tree line is still quite high. So I actually thought I'd be hiking above tree line for most of the hike. And what ended up happening is that I was in the trees for a lot of the hiking that day, which just really surprised me. But and then last, like there's actually, I think there's a clip on the video footage where I'm like over 15 miles in and I'm like, man, I feel like $1,000,000. This is like the best day of hiking ever. I'm loving this. Just enjoying being out there solo and alone. And then by the time I get to like mile 22 or 24, I was like done. My knee was hurting. I was rationing food all day, and it was just, I was not super, I guess you could say, happy. Just started to fade off pretty quick. Had highs and lows within the same day, which is very common for those of you that are out there hiking. It's very common to have, right, moments where it's the highest of highs, and other moments where it's not great. You're more on the lows. But yeah, I was having this knee pain, which was definitely frustrating, and I was just really hoping that knee pain would go away and lessen up. And then I've mentioned I was rationing food, but I want to describe what that means. One of the things that I've been doing the last few years is trail running, and with trail running, there's a lot of crossover. There's, especially when it comes to like performance in the backcountry, making your own body perform in the backcountry. And two of the absolute biggest things that I've learned and been able to dial in, because I struggled to dial in at least the hydration side, is I've learned a lot about nutrition and hydration. So starting with nutrition, this year when I ran my 100-mile ultramarathon, I finally seemed like I hit my hydration numbers pretty well off. I was taking in at least 1,000 milligrams of electrolytes, salt, for every liter of water. And obviously, like, the salt that you take in matters too. Like, not just like Mortensen's table salt, right? So I was taking in Scratch, was the primary salt, and that's going to give you things like potassium and chloride and these other things that help you absorb the water, as well as just keep everything in balance, right? But there's a newer one that I was testing out because on that particular hike run, a friend of mine had given me some salt tabs or capsules, and I realized, like, man, those could be really useful. And what ended up happening is I ended up testing and then bringing on as a retail product we sell now, capsules from Redmond, Real Salt, or Relight, is the brand or the sub brand of what it is. Redmond salt is known for making a really high mineral-rich salt, or mining it, I should say. And so they've started this other brand of hydration called Relight, and I've been really, really happy with it. So on this hike, I took a bunch of salt tabs from Relight, which we now sell. So if you're a Live Ultralight member, you can go and get these. And the reason I liked them is they're just so easy to calculate. You know, when you're ultra running, a lot of times you're calculating your food very specifically for each aid station and each mile of the trail. But when you're hiking, it's not always like that, right? You're filling up when you need to fill up water. You're mixing drinks when you want to mix drinks, and so I really like the idea of these salt tabs, because if I wanted a salty drink, mix of drink, I could literally take like a Great Value lemonade, dump it in a water bottle, and then I could just pull apart the capsule and dump the salt in there. If I didn't want a salty drink, I wouldn't do that. I would just take the salt tab and then drink water. But it's also really easy to map how much salt you're taking. And I knew that this was going to be really critical. One, because if I'm going drastically under on calories, I believe if you're getting into a potential like ketosis situation, I think salt is pretty helpful, and staying hydrated, obviously, but that it's like an important part of burning fat, right? And then the other side of it is like, I've got no room for error. Like, I can't get altitude sick, or this trip is not going to work. I can't get behind on fluids and have a bad day. I can't, I have to hit numbers, because I have to hike 25 miles a day in the wilderness. So I used these salt tabs, and it ended up working extremely well. I was essentially aiming to take in 400 milligrams of salt for every liter of water, which is quite a bit less than when I'm running. And to my understanding, your sweat salt concentrate remains the same, whether you're running or walking, right? And so it's like you'll probably be asking the question, well, why so much less salt than when you're running and you're taking in 1,000 milligrams of salt? Well, a couple things. One, I'm eating more food that has more salt in it when I'm hiking versus when I'm running. When I'm running, it's pretty much all what I'm drinking. But hiking, you're taking in more food, you're getting salt from that. And two, your body actually can store salt. And I don't know all of the science here behind it, but there are salt and fat reserves in your body. And I just have found that if I'm doing a lower exertion level activity, I don't have as high of a need to make sure I'm hitting like a full 1,000 milligrams. So goal, take 400 milligrams of salt in salt tabs or in drink mixes for every liter of water, if not more. So it's kind of bouncing between 400. 400 is the minimum, I guess you could say, of what I was taking. The other side of what I learned and brought into this whole situation was from the nutrition side. And again, this is stuff I've learned. I'm not like a nutrition expert. It's just, this is what works for me. It's what I've studied out of books. It's what I've studied out of professionals and doctors in this industry. But what I found is that, or from my understanding, your body can burn about half of the energy it's expending from fat when you're doing efforts like these, and the other half needs to come from your nutrition. And so what I did, and also like there's this concept, especially in running, that's a little more popular, called bonking. Bonking is when you basically just hit a wall. It's like you're running along, everything's going good, and then next thing you know, you just have no energy and you feel like complete crap, and you just have to stop, and it's called hitting a wall or bonking. And so to avoid that, if you are dripping in consistent and constant calories, you're able to keep yourself off of that wall, right? Because your body's burning fat as efficiently and fast as it can, but then you're dripping in additional nutrition. That additional nutrition is just going to help you to avoid that bonk or having issues. So that was the plan. I was taking in about 100 calories every hour and just trying to make that work the best that I could as I was hiking. And it worked really well. And I definitely had a moment that day and the next day where I was like, man, if I, just hadn't learned and practiced some of this stuff, when I left that food back in the car, I would have been in just a significantly worse position. Not to mention, by dripping in the calories throughout the day, getting carbohydrates throughout the day, those carbohydrates also help your body absorb fluid. So another side benefit of kind of doing it this way. But I was hungry. Day one, I was hungry, probably fed into how I felt getting into camp at night, wishing that I had more food or wanting more food, but definitely hungry throughout the day. But I mean, I hiked sun up to sundown, set camp just as it was getting dark. And I mean, I got out of my tent just as it was getting light. I started hiking that morning, like left camp, started hiking, I want to say around 7:20 in the morning. And that was pretty standard for this whole trip. So get through day one, sleep at this beautiful lake. And I knew that coming into day two, I was going to get into some really cool high country. So got up, started hiking, and really cool experience, just not far from camp. I was hearing elk bugle, and the farther I went in down the trail, the closer I was getting to this bugling group of elk. And I got pretty dang close to them. They weren't, I don't know how far they were, maybe a couple hundred yards away. I couldn't see them, but I let out a bugle, which I kind of do just with a whistle essentially. And I had this bull bugling back at me, and it was a lot of fun. And you'll be able to hear that in a video, but really, really fun experience, really beautiful morning. Got out there, ran into someone pretty quick actually on the trail that was doing a CDT through hike, and then continued on my way And then I cut up and into this little basin with the lake, and was feeling like I was in the middle of nowhere. I was like, man, just felt like I was never going to see anyone because the trail was so faint. And I went up to this lake called Timico, and I actually sat down on the side of this lake for just a second to take a break and just take in this beautiful view. And I remember specifically saying to myself, man, there's no one here. I feel like I'm completely alone. It's just absolutely beautiful. And I like kind of finished this thought, and then I like looked to my left, and like two guys are like walking like 20 yards from me. And I was like, whoa, super shocked me, but started talking to these guys, and these two dudes for 31 or 32 years have been coming and hiking in the Wind Rivers every single year. And so I just started picking their brain about so many things, what they felt like the risks were with bears in the area, what they felt like some of the most beautiful areas were, and just they were telling me about how much things have changed as far as the amount of people coming in. Because I'll tell you what, Big Sandy Trailhead was insanely busy. Probably the busy, I would say easily, other than in national parks, busiest trailhead I've ever been to. But almost no one went the direction that I went. They all went straight up towards the Cirque of Towers. But anyway, so talking to these guys, and they're just such an amazing wealth of knowledge. And they just really showed me like how big the Wind Rivers were, and how after hiking for like 32 years, it just still felt like they were still exploring. Like there's just that much country up there. Anyways, it was trying to think of anything else that they said that I want to share here, but phenomenal to talk to guys like that. And it was also, I would say, one of the things that I took away from that conversation that was just wild to think about is they told me of an experience that was only from about 4 or 5 years back, where they were up in these mountains the same week, roughly in September, and they got hit by a crazy windstorm. And I can't remember like the speeds of the winds or whatnot, but they said it blew down 10,000 trees, and that everyone was just like abandoning their tents and gear and trying to get out of there. Said that in a single night, it froze over the lakes so thoroughly that you could walk on the lakes, and that because of the wind, it had sprayed water up on the bushes on the far sides of the lakes, like 20 to 30 yards, and that was all frozen ice. Sounded like just one of the most bizarre experiences. And then trying to hike out, well, the trail is covered under, sometimes up to 20-foot high tree, falls and crossings. So they said it was absolutely wild, but it's just a reminder of like how insane these mountains are. Because when I had gone in there, it was the same time of year 5 years ago, and it snowed on us, and it was one of the coldest trips. I just wasn't fully prepared. The pad that I was sleeping on was a very old pad that we decommissioned a long time ago from Outdoor Vitals. And I think that thing just was not warm enough. You're sleeping on cold granite. You're sleeping next to water everywhere. It snowed. One of the coldest trips like that I can remember. Like there's cold trips when you're out of the tent, and then there's cold trips where you're cold out of the tent and where you're cold in the tent. And just that was probably the coldest I remember being at nighttime in quite a while. But these mountains are just so rugged. They're just so intense. It's so cool. It's so cool. It's really what attracts me to these mountains. But so I break off from them, and because I'm hiking 25 miles a day, I will be 100% honest, because some of you guys out there listening to this are going to be like, what is wrong with you? Why did you hike 25 miles a day? That's the exact opposite thing of what you should be doing in the backcountry. Well, let's talk about that for a second. I agree. I don't think that this is what everyone should be doing all the time. I think that hiking 25 miles a day is less than ideal. But at the same time, I think hiking 20 miles a day is more of a sweet spot for me at least, where I'm getting enough breaks throughout the day. I'm getting enough time to stop and relax, but I'm also there to explore. So a big part of me going and doing trips like this is to explore. A big part of why I even go into the backcountry is just to see and explore things, see things that so many other people never, ever get to see. And the thing about exploring and seeing things is you have time limitations. 99% of us do. We have time limitations. For me, it's kids. It can be things that are needed at the business. It can be a whole magnitude of things, right? Even someone like me that, like, let's be honest, I have more ability and fortune to spend time outside than a lot of people. I still have limitations myself that make it tough, right? So in this window, I wanted to see as much of this beautiful country as I possibly could. And I wanted to complete the 100-mile challenge. So let's talk about the 100-mile challenge. The idea with the 100-mile challenge is to encourage or push people to go out there and do a DIY 100-mile hike. Why 100 miles? Well, 100 miles is typically less than most people are going to be hiking unless they're through hikers or section hikers. Most people go out there and they hike, 20 miles in a weekend, maybe up to 40 miles in a weekend if they're pushing. And that's the kind of trip they always do. So setting a distance of 100 miles absolutely pushes people to go past their typical limits and to force something to happen. Plan a little bit better, maybe go somewhere where they haven't been able to go because it just took more time, more energy, more planning. So it encourages them to go and hike a bucket list level hike, right? The other side of it is I'm a massive believer in pushing your own limits and doing something like difficult and challenging, at least once a year. I end up doing this year. I decided I did way too many of them. Oh man, I almost burned myself out between Grand Canyon, 100-mile hike, 100-mile ultra marathon, and a backcountry hunt that I did that was insanely physical. I'm ready for some relaxing trips. I mean, I did go on some relaxing trips. I took my kids out backpacking, went camping, in a handful of different ways where it was more relaxing trips. So I like to mix it up. But the power I see of doing these 100-mile hikes or pushing your own limits can be boiled back to this concept called misogi. So if you want to look up misogi, that'll explain it. But what I found is that pushing your own limits teaches you a few things. One, if you never push your own limits, you'll never know how far you can go, right? If you're not willing to risk going too far, you'll never know how far you can go. And by pushing your own limits, I find that you rewrite your brain to possibilities. You rewrite your brain to what's possible and what's practical. And then when you come back to, quote unquote, real life, you come back with a perception that is completely changed. You come back with this perception of like, man, this problem that I have, or this thing that I have to do is so hard. And when you go and do something really, truly hard, like really physically hard, and Mother Nature is involved, it allows you to be like, this isn't hard. It gets you back into perspective. It's the same reason I love to travel. I love to go travel into second and third world countries and just remember how fortunate I am. And when I come back and I see things that aren't right, that aren't great, I can just be like, man, that's not even a problem. Like, why am I frustrated about this, right? It's nothing, right? Anyway, so those are some of the reasons I wanted, I'm out there doing 25 miles a day. But again, part of it is to complete a challenge, a personal goal, and to see as much of this country as I can. So going through day 2 and it was, again, just absolutely beautiful. Got down, saw some different lakes, had a couple passes. I'm just kind of scrolling, honestly, on Onyx, in the 3D mode, and looking at some of this. Some of this is honestly funny because as I'm looking at it, it's like I can hardly remember. And you'll say like, well, it's because you're going so fast. But no, it's like when you're passing like 20 plus lakes a day. I never knew what some of these lakes were. Like there's just too many to keep track of, right? It was just so many lakes. Man, day 2 was such a blur. That's so interesting. Anyways, at the end of day 2, I got up to this beautiful area where it was got up to a lake called Middle Fork Lake. And funny enough, those 2 guys that I'd talked to were like, oh yeah, when you get to Middle Fork Lake, if you go down around to the far side, there's some really amazing campsites up there. And I was thinking, oh yeah, like I'll get to Middle Fork, I'll do that. Like mileage wise, should be fine to do that. No, by the time I got to the bottom of Middle Fork Lake, I was at 25 or 26 miles or something like that. And so I had to find a campsite close because when I looked at this lake, and this was like what was so mind-boggling to me about the Wind Rivers, was you get to a lake way deep into the backcountry, into the wilderness. And in Utah, it's like, yeah, you can find those, but they're not huge lakes, right? They're just little lakes, like, but these lakes in the Wind Rivers, like I got to this one, I was like, this lake is 2 miles long. 2 miles long. It's a huge lake. I can't just walk around the edge of this lake and go set my camp on the other side unless I want to be an hour into the dark when I'm setting my camp, right? It was so fascinating to me how big these backcountry lakes were. And this isn't the only one. There were some other lakes that I went past that were just astronomically big. And it's really hard sometimes when you're doing your little 3D flyover on a computer screen to be like, oh, how big is this lake, or how is this? And that's why it's just so much better to go there, right? But so I set my camp that night, and I'll be honest, my knee had just gone in this ebb and flow where it was like it felt okay, and then I'd like go to climb, and my knee would start to hurt, and then it would feel kind of okay. And then I got to Middle Fork Lake, and I took a couple pictures, and then I hiked up the side of this hill to set a campsite. And it was only like 200 yards, and my knee just like gave up's not the right word, but like I just developed this incredibly sharp pain. The sharp pain that I'd been feeling got worse, and it was really concerning for me. Like you're trying to shrug it off, but you're like, man, what is this? Like this is going to derail the trip right here. I'm going to have to start cutting things out and just start hobbling back to the car tomorrow. So there's a lot of uncertainty, but set camp up, get my bear hang done, climb into my tent, my soaking wet tent, because you're camping next to lakes and streams everywhere. There's so much condensation, and there was like no wind at night to help blow air through your tent and keep that condensation down. So there's tons and tons of condensation, not to mention that the first day everything got wet from some rain and things like that. So I remember pulling out my tent, and it's just soaking wet. But I was testing our new top quilt with the gold treatment Expa Dry, and it was really, really impressive. But I won't get too much into that. Just know that the whole purpose of that is that it dries more thoroughly and fast. And I can 100% testify that even getting like moisture all over the outside of the bag, then me climbing in the bag, all sweaty from hiking, that bag was drying out and re-lofting to 100% every night of the trip. It was really, really impressive. But go to bed, sleep that night. Not to mention that my sleep was a little rough throughout this whole trip because I'm a side sleeper, but I cannot sleep on this shoulder that was injured. So I really could sleep directly on my back or on my one shoulder that was not injured. And that was difficult, to say the least. It was a little bit frustrating at times, and I'm just used to having a lot more flexibility of rolling around and sleeping in different positions. But next morning I get up and start walking. It's freezing cold, frost on everything. Walk around this lake and get to the far side. And the trail I was going to take up through this pass, well, I found out pretty quick it's a route, not a trail. There was no trail there. So I'm hiking up through this pass, and my knee is just progressively hurting more and more and more. And I get to the top of the pass, and I literally sat down and was just like, I think I'm going to have to call the trip short. Like, I can't do this. My knee is really hurting. I sat there, I stretched it. I took my trekking pole and rolled it on some muscles, trying to figure out what muscles were tight and were pulling on my knee to create this torque and tension and sharp pain. Because that's my whole theory about all of things. Like, you get knee pain, there's a root of the knee pain. And the root of the knee pain is typically either muscles above or below the knee. And I just believe that with kind of pretty much any joint pain, right? So I stretch out, I take a little bit of a break, and I start walking. And the knee had really been hurting mainly on uphills. So the next section of trail was all downhill, cut down through this beautiful area. Went past a lake called Rainbow Lake, and man, that's funny. I did think there was a trail on the one side of Rainbow Lake, and now that I'm looking at it, there is, and it looks like it was way shorter, which is comical because I was like, man, there has to be a faster way around this lake. But beautiful area, seeing ospreys just everywhere. And it was so fun to hear them, especially in the mornings as they were making their calls, their calls, and just diving through the canyons. And it was really, really pretty. But it was pretty much all downhill. So things are going well. I'm trying to pick up some speed because on day 2, I did not get as many miles as I wanted to. I want to say that I only did like 23 instead of 25. Part of that was because I had stopped for a little to film just a little bit, I think, that day. But the other part of that was these trails they're no joke. Like, when you get up into the wilderness, they can't use chainsaws. They're so under-traveled and things that they're not the kind of trails you find on the Colorado Trail or the Appalachian Trail. Like, they are rugged trails. And I was using my Coros watch to navigate because Onyx Backcountry would not work and load on my phone. I need to check it again now that I've been back, but I don't know what happened there. I think there was an update, and it just completely failed. And so then I was using my Garmin InReach app for when I needed my phone, but really I ended up navigating all of the 100 miles on my Coros watch. My Coros, I run the Apex 2 Pro, and I had luckily loaded GPX file onto my watch, and I had to navigate the entire trip off of that. But anyways, I was scooting along. This would have been on day 3, and there was a lot of like more mild terrain during this section. Not a lot of climbs, pretty flat, easier going. Clicking off the miles, and got to later in the day, and by this point I wasn't rationing food anymore. I need to mention that. I actually had a little bit of extra food in the very bottom of my food bag that I'd forgot, that are like these little snack packs from ReadyWise, and I had forgot that I had those. So because I hadn't eaten them the first 2 days, now I had an extra 400 calories a day for the next 2 days Plus, there was a little bit of food I hadn't finished on both of the first 2 days. Like I'd almost rationed maybe a hair too much. So I was eating, and that was good. It was really helping me feel better. But hiking along and got up to the point in the day where I was going to start my climb. Now the climb here was, and this is where I started to bump into a lot more people because I'm getting back closer to the Cirque Towers. But I was climbing up past an area called Skull Lake and past an area called Pyramid Peak and Maze Lake and Pyramid Lake. And it was going really well. And when I got to the climb, I was kind of nervous all day, like about the knee. But the knee had just felt like it went from feeling like I'm going to have to reroute everything and cut this short to feeling like, hey, I think it's okay. Like, feels a lot better. I don't know what's going on here, and got to this climb thinking like, okay, this will be a big test for the knee. And the knee did totally fine. Climbed up past Pyramid Peak, past this area called Twin Lakes, and then I stopped in Haley Pass and had my dinner, which was one of the most iconic views, I would say, for like a dinner spot of the trip. Just absolutely beautiful. But dropped down from there, went down to another massive lake called Grave Lake that again was like 2 miles long. Just like in Utah, I've never been to a lake that big that didn't have boats on it. And in the Wind Rivers, they're everywhere. It's just, it blows my mind. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. So spend that night down there at Grave Lake. And at this point, I had hiked over 25 miles that day and was basically setting up camp in the dark again. And body was feeling pretty good. I'm thinking, I think I've got this. Like, I think I'm actually going to be able to do this 100-mile hike. Next morning, got up, went past a lake called Washakie Lake, and then went up through Washakie Pass. Now, this was kind of comical to me because as I'm going up through Washakie Pass, I literally say to myself, this is the steepest pass I think I've ever climbed up. It's just so steep. Not that it's like way long or way hard. It was just so steep. And I'm carrying this big camera. I've got 7 pounds of extra gear over like my ultralight setup. So really starting to weigh on me and get frustrating that I've got all this extra weight. But get up through that pass, bump into a few people, and then drop down from there. And then this is when I'm getting now over by a lake called Shadow Lake, Billy's Lake, Barron Lake, and getting close to the Cirque Towers. That section of the day, really pretty, just trying to hit hydration marks, make sure I'm staying hydrated because it had gotten a lot hotter from day one when I was there till this last day. This is day 4. This is Sunday. Funny enough, when I had been driving up there, I had jumped on a phone call with Dan Becker, and he'd asked where I was going. I told him, and he's like, "Oh yeah, like you're going to the Cirque Towers. It'll be great. Texas Pass isn't that bad." And I'm like, I honestly haven't had time to look at all the passes and see what they're like. So I didn't know anything about Texas Pass, but the fact that he said it kind of made me like, well, what's Texas Pass? Is Texas Pass terrible? I don't know. But he's like, oh, it's really not that bad. It's not as bad as they say. And I'm like, well, what do people say, right? What do people say about this pass? And anyways, so I'm coming around. Let me just tell you what. When you're, what was I, like 85 miles in or something like that, and you come up to Texas Pass and you see this pass that literally is just a rock scramble route, that was a little bit demoralizing because this pass, in fact, was the steepest pass I think I've ever done on a quote unquote actual trail. Just straight up the mountain. And I was cursing down a little bit for lying to me, but honestly, I don't think he did lie to me. It wasn't that it was that much vertical. It was just that it was that steep. And so the best thing you could do put your head down, don't look at the top, and just keep moving, right? Relentless forward progress. Got up through the pass, and oh my goodness, it was just insanely beautiful. One, I bumped into a bunch of bighorn sheep, so I got some cool pictures and stuff of these bighorn sheep up there. But then you just have that beautiful view of the Cirque of Towers, and I don't know, it's hard to describe this. And I think what I didn't realize is just how big and how beautiful they were. And I think they don't get nearly the credit that I believe that they should. And I think it's just because, guess what? You have to hike to them. Like, you don't just get to, like drive your car to them like you do in, say, Yosemite or Zion National Park. Like, you have to hike a significant amount of distance to get up here. But, yeah, absolutely beautiful. Coming down Texas Pass was way steeper than I wanted it to be on tired legs. Got down in there, took a couple little stops and then went up to go through a pass called Jackass Pass. The pass was really easy, but after the pass really sucked. Coming past Arrowhead Lake, absolutely just a rock scramble, unless you take a trail that goes way up and around the lake. And then went down by this North Lake, and again, just turns into this rock scramble, and I'm just so tired, right? I'm like crossing mile 90 on the trip now, ready to be done, I guess you could say. But after getting past both those lakes, I had a very enjoyable 8-mile walk, back down to the truck with little to no climbing. In fact, my watch, or my mapping service, I can't remember where I was seeing it, was saying that there was 0 feet of elevation climb. And it's just always funny when you're that tired. You're just like, if it was like 5 feet of climbing, I'd be like, you lied to me. You said there was 0 feet of climbing, because you're just toast. Like, I was really tired and mentally really tired. But so I guess to recap the trip, specifically, I tried to end the trip with some of the most scenic country, and I would say that's true. Like, Washakie Pass and that whole area was absolutely incredibly beautiful and well worth it. And I think my answer was because when my knee was hurting and not functioning great, I kind of was like, I don't need to do this. I don't need to kill myself over this. And if I only got 90 something miles, like, I'm literally going on a 40-mile hike the week after, and so I'm gonna do the 100-mile challenge in the stacked version. Like, why am I trying to kill myself to do all this stuff? And I kind of made peace with that. But then things started to work out. I was doing better, so I went and did the whole thing. And when I got done with it, I guess my thought on it was, I am so glad I did that trip exactly. That trip was, there's nothing I would have cut out of that trip. Like, everything I did and everything I saw, I wanted to see. And the idea of being like, well, I should have just hiked 70 miles or I should have just hiked 50 miles. Yeah, that's one way to see it for sure. Like, you can spend more time maybe. But I've now had the ability to see so much more, and I can't think of anything that I would cut out from that. Like, I just enjoyed all of it. So I was really happy, really, really happy at the execution of the hike. And I honestly was really proud. I've never hiked that many miles on that rough of terrain with that amount of elevation gain and loss, on that level of crappy wilderness trails, where it's tough to maintain them. I've never done that. And to do so with less training than I typically want and everything, it really came back to this concept of base fitness and just the things I've learned over the last, say, 3 years specifically, 4 years specifically. All of that came into a head to make this trip possible, right? And I did. Like, I have a pretty good sense of accomplishment for doing this particular hike. I know it's not like the most crazy thing in the world, right? But it was sun up to sundown hiking every day and pushing especially with the amount of weight I was carrying with camera gear and things like that. It was a lot. But I highly, highly advise people go do this hike. It's absolutely an incredible hike. And there's so much more country there to see. Oh my goodness, there's so much more country there to see that really this wilderness in so many ways is, I don't know, it's got to be, it just has to be one of the best wildernesses out there. Like there's just so much it offers and so much total terrain. I mean, like even as I was coming past like the Circuit Towers and I'm looking to the south, I'm like, holy cow, like there's a whole nother range of mountains, not even like single basin. I mean like basins this direction. And I didn't even get to see Titcomb. I thought I was looking at Titcomb, but there were so many basins and still so much country between there and Titcomb. Like it's just an incredible wilderness area and was a ton of fun. So, all right, so let's talk about anything else from this trip, lessons or things. As far as gear goes, I was testing a new tent prototype and specifically a new fabric in the tent. Didn't really, the tent design impressed, but the fabric did not impress me. So I'm not going to throw that out there, I guess, too hard because I'm not going to say we're never going to use it, but, or how to say that? I doubt we'll ever use it. We're not super big fans. And that was actually what's called a TNT fabric. I'm losing the Ultra TNT, I think is the name of the fabric. But other parts of that tent absolutely enjoyed and loved. We've got I'll just call it a mid-layer, another mid-layer type piece that I really, really enjoyed on this trip as well. Obviously, the pack, CS40, is always just an incredibly comfortable pack for trips like this. That carbon fiber suspension is just, it's so impressive. The work that we put into that harness, that hip belt, that suspension, it's incredible. And yes, carbon fiber, like the carbon fiber we're using is really expensive. It just absolutely is. It's for that carbon fiber frame from a manufacturing side, costs us 10 times what an aluminum frame would cost. 10 times. But I'm telling you, the more you hike with that carbon fiber frame, the more you will never want to hike with a more stiff aluminum frame. It's really, really incredible, really, really comfortable. Gear wise, like running through my gear, it was pretty dang streamlined. Running Tusher rain jacket. I think I had a Nova UL plus this other mid layer, so I had overkill on jackets for sure. Highline leggings, joggers. The joggers were great. Probably could have got away with shorts, but in this terrain, I did enjoy the joggers, especially knowing that it can be pretty unexpected and storms can roll in and really wreak a lot of havoc. It's hard not to have the joggers, I guess. The Hoka Speedgoat 5s were still my shoe of choice. They worked really well. Platypus Quick Draw water filter, phenomenal. Again, something in the membership area of the website. And ReadyWise meals were primarily what I ate out there. They're really good. I know most of you guys listening buy the crap out of Peak Refuel meals, and don't get me wrong, Peak Refuels are amazing, but ReadyWise is right there with them in terms of quality, in terms of price. Their packaging is a little bit smaller, and some of the meals actually have more calories than the Peak and way less than the Peaks. So you got to check out those ReadyWise Pro meals, specifically get the Pro meals, which is also in that membership area. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about this trip other than I came off this trip feeling Like it was exactly what I needed. It gave me some really good perspective in life. Some of the things that I'm trying to personally work on and grow, and be better at, because I've had some pretty big life changes in the last year. I felt like this trip ended up playing right into them. I don't believe there's accidents in life really, because by not believing in accidents, you can believe in, I guess, full accountability. And so things like leaving my food in the car, probably wasn't an accident. Probably was something I needed to learn on, whether it was working on acceptance of that or whether it was something that I just brought into my life or something that I needed to, maybe it was just me like rationing out food and realizing like, hey, maybe I can get away with less food than I thought, or just different things, right? But I came off the trail in a really good spot and just was so happy for the opportunity to go and do this hike. And I thought a lot about all the other participants in the 100-mile challenge while I was out there and just what they're doing. I mean, one of the most uplifting things I ever do is just log into that Facebook group and see everyone posting about all the things they post about: losing weight, getting out with friends and family, rekindling relationships with friends and family, rekindling a relationship with backpacking that maybe they've let go of, pushing their own limits, changing their own perspectives in life on possibilities, realities, all these things that are just such positives. And definitely those were all top of mind for me as I was out there. And it's fun. It's why I love to do what I do. It's why I love my job. It's why I love my business. And I hope that just me recapping this was interesting and was also maybe a little bit inspiring, or maybe you learned something from this. Just trying to recap on anything else I learned from this. I'm again, huge proponent of having a GPS watch. Last couple of years I've been running these Coros watches and really, really like them. They're really, really insightful. As usual, take going to altitude seriously, get good rest days prior, keep the stress on the body days prior way down, and then just hydrate and eat consistently and make sure that you're staying hydrated. I've found that to be just so big. I had no altitude issues on this trip, which was really good, because usually I'll have some level of like headache or something that at least comes up and then I can get on top of, but really was able to just avoid all of that with what I feel like was good execution. So I don't know that I have anything additional to share. Maybe the last thing is just don't be afraid to go backpack by yourself, right? This was my first 100-mile trip that I did solo. I've done a lot of backpacking solo, but this is my first 100-mile hike that I did solo. And there was a part of me that was like, man, this is going to be like crazy boring. Am I going to be like, is this going to be hard to not have anyone to talk to for 5 days, But I really enjoyed it. And if you're someone who's like, no, I'll never backpack solo, like that's the exact opposite of what I love and whatever, like try it, I think some people, they need to like backpack with groups to feel comfortable. And I get that. And like, you should do that until you are comfortable. And then at that point, don't be afraid to go backpack on your own. And give that a shot. I think there's a lot of, it's a different experience. And both are great, but if you only do one, then you're missing out on another opportunity there. So don't be afraid to do that. But, man, what an amazing trip. So glad got it done. Good to keep that streak alive of the nonstop 100-mile challenge. And I'm so grateful for all of you guys that signed up and did the 100-mile challenge with us. But I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. If you guys do have questions about the trip, jump over to YouTube. We post these on YouTube. We can answer comments there. Really, really easy. We're also getting into a groove where I would like to start doing more question and answers on here, and maybe even bring Brigham, our product designer, on to answer specific questions about specific pieces of gear, or how would you do this or how would you do that, and just kind of open up that expertise to people that are maybe newer to backpacking or backpack their whole life but are still looking to learn. So keep those in the back of your mind. I hope that we can get on a good flow where we're doing like shorter, informal episodes of answering some of those questions as well. So have that on your radar. But thanks again for tuning in, guys. Make sure that you like, subscribe, and rate our podcast. That's definitely the best ways to help us grow our reach here and help and assist more people. And if you've not yet rated it, again, please go rate that. Really, really appreciate it. So, okay, thanks for tuning in and listening to my recap of my 100-mile Wind Rivers hike. What an awesome experience. What an awesome adventure. I hope you guys are out doing the same thing. I hope you guys are out there hiking, getting time into the backcountry and getting disconnected from the craziness that life can be, the technology, the noise, the day in, day out. Get your head right, get your perspective on life right, and use that wilderness that we are so lucky to have in the United States. If you're listening in the United States, at least, tap into that. It truly isn't an opportunity for everyone. It is an opportunity for us. So, okay, with that, we will see you guys on a future episode.